Yeah, so we only have an hour together today, and I will start off by telling you a little bit about my background as a writer, as an artist. But I'm very curious to hear from all of you as well about what brings you here and why. What brought you to this workshop and what interests you about this particular topic that we're talking about today, which is writing about oneself with authenticity and truth. I think writing about oneself with authenticity and truth, it's actually, I think it's a more radical act than we might think it is, especially in this day and age that we live in, this zeitgeist that we happen to be in, where there seems to be a lot of emphasis being put on conforming, and where people who are opposed to difference and to diversity and to texture are feeling emboldened to be transparent in their bigotries. So, and where does this feed in to writing about one's identities? And I can only speak for myself. So I will be a little. I will. Be out of necessity be self-centered for the next few minutes and talk about myself, because I can only talk about my experience and my own identities as a queer Filipinx man, and how I navigate those identities. I think in this day and age, I think it's a radical gesture. It's a radical gesture to be to speak one's truth authentically and truthfully. I guess one of the questions I get a lot from the young writers and artists that I mentor and that I teach is, well, how far can I go in terms of writing my truth? Do I? How much should I consider writing for a mainstream audience or for a quote unquote general audience? And I'm sure that's a question that a lot of you in this room have here as well. And to tell you the truth, there's no blanket. I don't have a blanket answer to that question. I don't have a blanket answer to the question of how authentically should I write, and how should I tailor it to a general audience or mainstream audience or not. That there's so much of that depends on the particular context that you're dealing with, or that you happen to be in, the particular situation that you're in. I do think, though, that just in my opinion, in terms of artistic, what I deem to be artistically excellent and valuable and worthwhile, and that ties in also to what is politically and socially valuable and worthwhile. I think anything less than completely no-holds-barred, anything much less than a completely no-holds-barred, uncensored, unadulterated expression of your truth is unsatisfactory. So, that's for me as a writer. That's that's all I can go by. If I were, I don't feel as though the response of my readers or my audiences necessarily, even though I do care very deeply about what my readers and my audiences, I care about how they respond to my writing, but it's not a care based on concern as to how I am going to come across to them, how I personally am going to come across to them. I don't. So, for example, just speaking very specifically about my book, Double Melancholy. There was the writing of that book was one of the most draining processes I've ever had to go through as an artist and as a person. It was I learned a lot about myself as both an artist and as a person. But one thing that I decided from the get-go, and even though there were a number of things about the book that I wasn't sure about, and that I had to learn through the writing of it, but one thing that I was quite sure about from the commencement of the project was that I did not want to generate a triumph narrative. I didn't want to come across in the book as having gone through all this stuff and have it end with the impression that I've completely crossed over to the other side, and that I no longer struggle with that I've completely overcome internalized racism and queerphobia and neoliberal beliefs and leanings, right? I mean, these are things that one of the things I wanted to leave my readers with at the end of the book was the idea that these are things that I am still in the process and will likely always be in the process of unlearning, and that this is a marathon project. This isn't a project that just ends, or that ended with when I finished the book. In fact, I feel that the book is just the beginning, really, of my personal project of self-decolonization. So there were many, I've had feedback from writers, fellow writers, friends of mine, fellow theater artists who read the book, and they told me, "Gee, I really admire how brave you were to expose so much of yourself in this book, because frankly, I wouldn't have been able to do that. There were things in your book that, if I were in your shoes, there's no way I would I would reveal that about myself, or let the public know about that I thought this at that particular time, that I had these racist or sexist opinions. I'd be really afraid. Because as you see, if you read the book, there's, I do airlift diary entries from throughout my life. I'm an obsessive journal and diary keeper. And that, because I wanted the reader to have a very, very specific, insight into my thought processes as a person, as a queer brown person living in a white supremacist queerphobic society, and how I had internalized so much of society's bigotries. So I guess the question is, did I have fear about how people would receive the book, and how people in turn would think of me? To tell you the truth, no, I didn't. Because I feel that as a writer, I'm lost if I don't feel that what I'm doing, or that I'm not doing everything I possibly can to serve the writing. And if I'm thinking of any other objective beyond that, I'm essentially losing my focus as a writer. The one thing I will admit, there was one thing that I made a concession on, and it was something and I'm not going to be specific about it, but it had something to do with my mother. And this was the only concession I made, because I didn't feel that it was necessary to embarrass my mother any more than I probably have, because she's read the book. But I felt that in this case, when I was debating, should I take this out because it's going to embarrass my mother or not, I decided that nothing was going to be lost, that I would still be able to tell the story I wanted to tell, even if I took this particular part out. So I decided to take it out, and I spared my mother, I think, some embarrassment. So yeah. So, but that was the only concession. That was the only concession I made. Yeah, the book, as I said, the book is there. It's far from being a triumph narrative, I think overall I'm proud of it, because I for the longest time, and I think I mentioned this yesterday when I was on the panel yesterday, I didn't think that my story, my particular experiences as a brown Filipinx person would be of any interest to anyone, because I'd never seen any kind of cultural representation of myself growing up. So I just, what that left me with was a belief that my story as a queer brown person and the stories of other brown people and other queer brown people were completely irrelevant. That only the stories of white people were relevant, or white straight people. I've come full circle, I think. Well, I wouldn't say I'm still, as I said, I'm still decolonizing, but I think my views on that have shifted dramatically. I think the genre of the memoir, more than ever, is a vital political gesture in this day and age. So, yeah. So that's my take on this issue. I guess there's a lot of you here. It's actually more than I'm pleasantly surprised at how many people there are here. It's wonderful that you're all here. I was thinking of just going around the room. I had planned to just go around the room and just ask people what brought them here, but I don't think we're going to have time to do that because there's so many people here. So I guess I'll just open it up to the room to see if anyone has any questions for me. I'm pretty much an open book, so you can ask me anything you want about the book or about the topic that we're talking about today, the writing process. Any questions you might have about your own work? Some of you here are writers. Yeah. Is there a mic or?
Hi.
Yeah.
My name's Diana. I'm an author as well. So I'm just curious. I know you have a professional life other than writing, and I know you work at UBC. And I'm wondering, I didn't read your book. I don't know if whether you've talked about racist incidents in your book, and I'm wondering how honest, or whether there were any of those in your book, and how honest you would be, and would you be concerned whether that would affect your employment? You're still young, and I mean, we do need to make a living, and I think about all that.
Yeah.
And the higher you go, the wider it goes. You have to fit in.
Yeah.
In reality, right?
Yes, you're absolutely. That's an undeniable issue. There's no questions. If you are, those of us, all of us who come from marginalized communities or multiple marginalized communities, it's dealing with the power structures. Who has the power, right? I have some privilege in the fact, I feel that I have a little bit of privilege in that I happen to, I personally travel in a milieu and work in a milieu, which is the literary theater milieu, which for the most part is very encouraging of honest expression, right? So when I'm not writing, I'm teaching in the creative writing department at UBC. So it's still part of that world, right? However, so my experience is a little different, I think, than maybe some other writers who have other careers besides writing, right? Who have maybe more mainstream careers. But I acknowledge that my situation is somewhat of a privileged one, and that I have a support network that encourages me to be honest, and not worry too much about, whether I'm going to lose employment. That said, in the book, I do talk about racist incidents, there are a number of racist incidents. And there was one incident, a professional incident, that took place, that I talk about in the book, that was racist, right? And I was very careful to not explicitly name who the person was. Also very careful about not giving away their gender. Right, so these are things I was mindful of, right? But but yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's, there's no question that it really depends on your situation, right? And in your particular circumstances, whether how honest you want to be, right? But I think there are ways that you can depict systemic abuse, systemic bigotry, systemic racism in a way that doesn't necessarily call out specific individuals, right? So that's the best answer I can give you. Yeah.
Maybe that's the problem for this age.
Well, I mean, yeah. I think also the bigger issue is when we call people out on racism, when we bring attention to racism, it's not a personal thing. It's not personal. It's systemic. Unfortunately, white fragility is a very, very real thing, right? And white people, or people in power, whether they're white or rich or men, too often, I think they take it as a personal attack when we're actually only, those of us who are on, kind of lower down on the food chain, actually call out systemic abuse, right? I would like to think that there's something that we can do to mitigate that white fragility, or the fragility of those in power. It's hard, right? It's hard, yeah. But I still think ultimately we have to speak our truth, find a way to speak our truth, So I'll open it up to other people to respond, but thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I think you've really... What's that? Well, thank you. But you've exposed a lot of what artists, writers of color, Indigenous writers, queer writers, any writer from a marginalized community are up against, and without and we're we just want to tell our story. We just want to speak our truth. But these are all these things. I know, and privileged people who are people in privileged positions, it's a sliding scale, right? But people with the most privilege, and it is mostly if you're rich, white, a heterosexual man, and that's people ask, well, why are they so predominant in the Western canon? Well, that's kind of the reason, right? Because they're not up against all these things, right? Also, I want to acknowledge my privilege of living in Vancouver, right? I mean, living in Vancouver, which is a very diverse city, I can travel inside and find support networks that are mostly Asian or people of color, right? If I were living elsewhere like Nelson, that might be much more difficult, right? So, okay, yeah. Self-compassion, self-care, because I'm so brutal with myself. Well, I mean, I did a lot of meditation, lots of meditating, yeah. That's another, I could talk for another hour about how helpful and how meditation has saved my life. But a lot of meditating. Just sitting with myself and being comfortable with my discomfort and embracing my discomfort, and having faith that I could grow from it. I think that's that really helped me through the writing of the book. And some glasses of wine here and there too helped. So yeah. Some joints, But, yeah.
We have time for one more question.
Okay, so one more question. Yeah, Ted, yeah.
Do you think you're, as an artist, that you're a person?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, when I was young and still extremely colonized, I talk about it in the book, you know, creative writing major at UBC. I mean, I used to, I think, scoff at the idea of art being political, but, you know, I think on that I've done a complete 360. I think all art is political, whether people are conscious of it or not. Art is political because I think any kind of movement of emotion, or any kind of extension of empathy towards the other is a political gesture. In terms of speaking explicitly about politics, I mean, I'm certainly comfortable doing that, you know, and I've become more comfortable doing that as I've grown and evolved as a writer. But I don't think every writer needs to do that, though, because I already think that what writers do is political. So I think that's an individual choice for each writer. But I'm certainly comfortable, you know, taking positions and speaking explicitly about politics. And so that was the last question, I guess. Yeah. Okay. No, except thank you. I'm so. Oh, sure.
I want to pick up somebody over here who said maybe we should form a little book club around that one book. So,
White Fragility? The book White Fragility? Oh, okay, yeah.
I think someone suggested maybe we should. Oh. Anyway,
Well, that's still an idea, so yeah, okay. If anyone's interested, yeah. But I just wanted to thank all of you for coming and sharing space with me and sharing space with each other. I wish I could stay for the other writers' workshops, but I have a flight to catch to Winnipeg. So my cab is probably on its way right now. So, but I really hope that you all enjoy the rest of the workshops today and the rest of the festival. So thank you. Thank you very much for coming.